Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a great day for reading. I am Amanda Turkey, the coordinator of school library services for the Santa Clara County Office of Education. Thank you for joining us for an author visit on Read Across America Day. Each year, March the 2nd is celebrated as a day of reading for everyone. Millions of people across the country, including you, are making time to read together. So I hope you are inspired to read with friends and family today during March for National Reading Month and every day after. So today's author visit is part of a larger initiative, Silicon Valley Reads. And Silicon Valley Reads brings together the Santa Clara County community through a theme that is explored through books and free activities from January through March. This year, we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of Silicon Valley Reads with the theme Journey to New Beginnings. Through this theme, we'll explore what a new journey means for different people, living somewhere new, meeting new people, or maybe learning something new about themselves. Each year, Silicon Valley Reads chooses age-appropriate books for readers like you. And one of the books featured this year was written by our visiting author. The author that we'll meet today wrote Furia, selected for Reese's Young Adult Book Club and the 2021 inaugural Pura Belpre Young Adult Gold Medalist Award. This book is about a young woman in Argentina with a passion for soccer that she has kept secret from her family. With an opportunity to pursue soccer at a higher level, she must face her secrets and make her own place in the world. Our visiting author, Yamile Saied Mendez, has received many accolades, such as the Junior Library Guild Gold Standard, the Whitney Award, Sybil's Award, America's Award, Bank Street Spanish Language Book Awards, among others. She was born and raised in Rosario, Argentina, but has lived most of her life in a lovely valley surrounded by mountains in Utah. Please welcome Yamile Saied Mendez, and also joining us today are our three student panelists from Branham High School, Lenny Withers, Nyla Metler, and Hasika Ogi. They will lead a discussion with our visiting author, Yamile. Thank you for joining us and leading a discussion about topics that you found interesting in Yamile's book, Furia.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm Yamile Saied Mendez. Thanks for this introduction, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. And I'm excited about all the questions.
Hi, I'm Nyla Metler, and I love to read. My mom's a librarian, and I'm super excited for everything as well. Okay, so I think to kind of just start off, our first question is kind of about just like reading and writing in general. And we were wondering what books kind of shaped your love for reading when you were younger, and like what kind of pushed you to want to start writing.
I love this question because, choosing a favorite book that I've read, it's kind of like choosing a favorite book that I've written or choosing among one of my children. It's kind of impossible because I've had favorite books that served a purpose at different periods of my life. And some books that were very formative when I was a young child, I'll go back and reread them now and they don't have the same power. And the reverse is also true. Some books that didn't have an impact on me and that, didn't resonate with me, now I go back and they're life-changing. So some of the books that made the most impact in me are by some authors that are not known in the US, but are known in other places in the world. Most of them are women from Argentina, and several of them I name in Furia, especially in the acknowledgements. Not to spoil it for you, but there's a scene in which Camila gives a stack of books to one of the little girls that she teaches English to. And these are the books that made me into a reader and a writer. And some of the authors were Alma Maritano, who was from Rosario, Laura de Betach, who was the daughter of Russian immigrants in the province of Santa Fe, where I'm from. And these are writers who, again, never hit the New York Times list, and they were never super famous, but they were writing in the 70s at the peak of the dictatorship in Argentina. And pretty much all of them had to stop writing at some point in their lives because their books were banned. And these women, most of them were women, and they were not writing about controversial things like, oh, let's subvert the government, let's get democracy again. But they were writing about, for example, responsibility or consequences for your actions, or giving, like making your own choices, which when you think about are very problematic topics for a country in which the government wants to subdue the people. And that's why they were forbidden. And some of their books were burnt in ginormous, bonfires. And the way that these books survived is because teachers would photocopy them and pass them along in the classrooms. And that's how they got to me. So when I found, I'm specifically thinking of two titles, The Visitor and another one, which I don't even remember the title, but I didn't know about it until I was an adult. It's called the Cube Tower. And I read the stories without knowing the title or even who had written them, because they were just photocopies, and I found out the backstory when I was an adult. So those books really made me into a reader. And also fairy tales. I love reading the traditional fairy tales from all over the world, and they're so dark. And I guess that's why I love both romance and horror and mystery, because in fairy tales you have it all. And to be honest, in my house, we weren't very religious. My mom, my parents didn't make us go to church or anything, but there was a Bible. And when I had reread all the books in my house and in my neighbors' houses, I would read the Bible. And I'll tell you, like, there's so much material for all kinds of stories in the Old Testament. So it's funny, but that's what my foundation, my literary foundation comes from.
All right, thank you so much, Yamile. My name is Hasika Ogi, and I really enjoyed reading Furia. Just from the first page, your words just like drew me in, and I really enjoyed that book. So our second question for you is, has Furia changed a lot from its inception? Like when you first thought of it, has it changed a bunch?
Excellent question also. So I started writing Furia back in 2006, and it didn't come out until 2020. So that sounds like such a long journey. And yes, there were many things that changed in Furia. Furia is not my first published book, but it's the first story that I started writing with the intent of being a published author. And back then, I didn't really know how to write a book. I majored in economics, and I was a translator for a long time, but I had never written a book. And, just because I use the computer every day doesn't mean that I know how the internet works, really, And so it was kind of the same with writing. I didn't really know what I was doing, but I had this idea for a girl that plays football in Rosario, and her story arc was pretty much what you see in Furia right now. But there were several elements that I didn't know how to convey. And so a lot of things changed going from the title. I worked under the title Southern Cross for many years. And then I changed it to Fury because, I'm writing for an American audience primarily. And so I thought, okay, I'll just translate Camila's nickname into English. But when it was acquired by my editor, she said, her nickname is Furia. It's not Fury. We're going to name it Furia. And this was an idea that would have been so outlandish back in 2006 because the market was not ready. It was very different. And it was not ready to accept the book. Number one, with a Latina character on the cover, a dark-skinned Argentine girl, and a title in Spanish. But so many things had changed. One of them was the organization We Need Diverse Books that came out in 2014, and that kind of paved the way for more diverse stories to be published. And so that's one way in which it changed. And although so many things changed through several very rigorous editorial rounds, two things remained the same. That were the first chapter and the last. I always knew how it started. I always knew what Camila wanted, and I always knew how it ended.
Sorry, I had a bit of trouble finding the unmute button, but I'm really glad your editor decided to keep the title of Furia because I think it's very fitting for the book.
Thank
So,
you.
oh, also my name is Linny. Forgot to add that first. Yeah, my name is Linny. Obviously, I also really loved your book. Roxana was probably one of my favorite characters.
I love to hear
I would
that.
say, yeah, I love Roxana. I also loved the young child that Camila was teaching, the young girl, because
Yes.
like love to see like young people be passionate about learning. Okay, on to my question. Sorry. Which character would you not like to walk a mile in their shoes, or which character would you rather like not be in your story?
So another amazing question, and it's kind of difficult because in a way, even though I always say, and I actually thought about saying this in the introduction, and then I got nervous and I didn't say it, like Furia is not the story of my life. A lot of people, like, is this autobiographical? It's not, but I am a little bit of every character in a way. I think the one that is, like the farthest from my own lived experience is the priest, Father Hugo. But everybody else, but I think I was actually thinking about it the other day when I was on a run, that, some of his philosophies, of course, they came from me because I wrote him. But, like in the characterization, he's the least like me. But there's a little bit of me in everybody, but the person that I wouldn't like to walk, like be, is perhaps Pablo, her brother, because he knows what's right and what's wrong, and he's a good guy. But Pablo is as much a victim of misogyny and violence as Camila is, even though he has other privileges that Camila doesn't have because she's a girl. In a way, rebelling against those paradigms is a little easier for her because it's in her nature. But Pablo, he feels that he has no other choice. And he knows that if he doesn't change, he's going to become just like their father, who is a person they both despise. But he doesn't have the courage that Camila has. And he doesn't have even the support of a community, because even though Camila's situation is very difficult, she has a role model in Coach Alicia, and she has the sisterhood of Roxana and the other girls from the team. But Pablo kind of feels that pressure, pulling him in from every different direction to kind of perform this persona of a macho man, and he thinks he has to be the savior of his family. And he wants to do what he wants to do, but he can't. So I feel like Pablo's life's pretty sad if he doesn't wake up, And also Karen's life is very difficult. And growing up, I had a stable home, and my parents worked hard, so nothing would, like I didn't suffer hunger or needs like Karen does. But I was, like a little mom for my siblings. My mom worked 3 jobs sometimes, and so we were alone a lot at home. And I, that heavy burden that Karen carries of taking care of her little ones, I felt it a lot too as a kid. And it's a difficult place to be when you're a child who already has a responsibility of other young people, because you love them, not because anybody perhaps told you that you had to take care of them. So I think those 2 characters are the ones that had, the hardest path in the book.
And then kind of I know we kind of talked about this a little bit before, but no one else was here, and kind of taking a quick shift before we get into a little bit more meatier questions. We were talking about like The Shadow of the Wind and inclusion of, and you mentioned that the books that she gives Karen are like some of your favorites that really shaped you as a writer and a reader. And so we were wondering if there were other literary references that you really, I don't know, like were like, oh, this is amazing. Like when you put it in, you snuck like little Easter eggs that you really enjoyed within your book.
Well, I also mentioned Alfonsina Storni, the great poetess from Argentina, and she has, she's kind of like a Frida Kahlo icon in Argentine literature, because she kind of like transcended her persona to become something more. So there have been songs written about Alfonsina. She had a very tragic ending. She died of suicide walking into the ocean, and you know, the legend says that it was because of a broken heart. But she was also a very feminist author, and so very conflicted. So just the fact that Karen reads, you know, the work of this poetess, and who was a contemporary of Gabriela Mistral, the Nobel Prize from Chile. You know, it says a lot about who Karen is, and by Camila knowing, oh, this is too much for a child to read, I'm gonna give her some, you know, children books so that her life would be a little easier. Since Camila can't help her physically, she tries at least to give her books that will be an escape instead of, you know, being heavy for her. So and let me think what other literary references I added. There are, you know, like the characters from one of the books that I mentioned, one of the Alma Maritano books. So Karen mentions Nicanor and Gora, who are the main characters of a book called A Balloon of Light is Loose. And that was one of those formative books that I read. And my editor, actually, those books are not translated into English. And she's always saying, Yamile, please translate them for me, because now I want to know who Nicanor and Gora are. And so that's one, you know, something that I have pending to do, at least translated just for my editor so that she can fall in love with them and have her heart broken like I did as a kid. But, you know, in a way, and I do have the epigraph from The Little Mermaid in at the beginning of Furia that says, you know, a siren doesn't have tears, so she hurts even more. Because, you know, at first sight, Furia is a very different story from The Little Mermaid, but it is kind of a retelling of The Little Mermaid. And I think, you know, like soccer fanatics would understand the metaphor when the great Diego Maradona, Argentina's big superstar before Leo Messi's time, during the 1994 World Cup, he was positive for doping, and that's when pretty much his career ended. And he said, my legs got cut off. And that's how a soccer player feels when they can't play soccer anymore. And so, and that's why, you know, I think of Camila as a retelling of The Little Mermaid, because she wants to play football, she wants to play soccer, and not doing so would be like having her legs cut off, kind of like The Little Mermaid when she, you know, she gets legs, but she loses so much more. So it's that dichotomy of, you know, you fight for your dream, but you lose something in the very big and important, you know, as important as your legs or your voice. And so that is a big overall literary Easter egg.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even notice that. That's amazing. Oh, I love that. Okay. I think we're moving on to a question from Hasika and Lenny. Thank you so much.
Yep. All right. So moving on to more like meatier questions. Our first question is, in the book, there's the character of Marisol, who's Pablo's girlfriend. And when I was reading the book, I felt like Marisol was a little bit like an alternate universe Camilla.
Yes.
Do you think there's a Marisol in our lives that might force us to self-reflect like Camilla did?
Yes, I think about Marisol all the time, and she's that mirror character and that alter ego of how Camila's story would end if she didn't have her own passion going forward. When I was young, and I think things are still very much the same in Argentina and in other places in the world where, you know, soccer is such a big influence. When kids are little and they ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? Pretty much every boy will say they want to become a soccer player. And every girl, what does she do? She will say she wants to be the soccer player's girlfriend, you know, or they will say, I want to be a model, because soccer players will date models, you know? And so that's where the term botinera comes from. Botín is the soccer boot, the soccer shoe. And so botinera is the girl that chases after, you know, the soccer boots, the soccer player. And so Camila is so critical of Marisol and so judgmental. And she even says on the second page, I don't know why my mom's so upset about me. I'm 17, I'm not pregnant, unlike every other girl in my family at that age. So she has that little bit of self-righteousness, like perhaps she feels better than every other girl. And it's not until she, confronts the fact that she is in love with Diego and that Diego loves her and that she has that opportunity. It's easy for her to look down on these botineras when being a botinera herself is not even an option. But when that becomes an option in her life and she has to decide what she's going to do, a botinera or a futbolera, she is a little more gracious and compassionate with, Marisol and even every other girl or woman who's been in that situation, being in love with a famous man. It's really interesting because after every Christmas break, I follow all my favorite soccer players online. And now, that's one of the cons and pros of having, access to these celebrities. There are so many cases which they go back home for the holidays and go back to Europe or their teams with a girlfriend. And that's, always the case with the young players. And then, the girlfriend becomes a celebrity just because they're with them. And sometimes they did have their own careers and their passions. There's a couple of girlfriends of the guys from the Argentina national team that are famous because they're singers or they're, athletes on their own. And so I'm always so interested by that dynamic. And I do feel like, that's a path that a lot of people follow because, yes, they want a way out of a life of poverty or they want more opportunities. Sometimes they just fall in love. And so society is very critical of these girls and these women because they follow their heart. And in a way, sometimes, and maybe I'm gonna be, jumping ahead of some questions about the romance later on, but I will just say that sometimes choosing a love that is healthy and good can be a revolutionary act. When Camila mentions that in her family, love was used as a weapon to hurt each other or to help, a hostage of the kids, in the case of her parents. A love like Diego's love that is good and going for that love can be revolutionary because it can also break ancestral trauma of, toxic relationships. But in Camila's case, that love was an obstacle for her dream. And so, yes, there is a little Marisol in everybody, I feel like, especially women. It's so hard, even if we follow our dreams, to balance, not only what society expects of us, but what we've wanted since we were little girls. Even though I've always wanted to, be independent, I left my country when I was 19, came to the US where I knew nobody. But in my heart, I always dreamed of having my husband and kids, like that traditional family. And so it's kind of hard to choose one or the other. And when you want both, it's a very difficult life. I hope I answered.
Yeah, definitely a difficult choice. I guess since we're on the topic of like famous people like football players and stuff, Camila mentions in the book that she believed that fame didn't really change Diego, that he was like the same person after he became famous. And do you think that's really true, that fame didn't really change Diego? Or do you think there was a change that Camila couldn't see? And if so, like, what was that change? And do you think that fame was good for Diego, and why or not? Lots of questions in one.
Oh, I love that question. I love it because I love Diego so much. He's also one that's the least like me, but I imagine if I were a boy and I would become Diego, this is what I would have done. So Diego did change with fame, and the changes started immediately, and she mentions them as soon as we see Diego on the page for the first time. He dresses way better. He has, like a haircut by an expensive barber, most likely. He fixed his teeth, and that's something super noticeable. He has diamond earrings and this perfume, and of course his possessions, the material things. He has a car that everybody knows it's Diego, and Pablo is also a professional soccer player, but he's at a different level, and he doesn't have that financial power that Diego has, but he envies it. He wants to get a car. He gets the same cologne from the mall, kind of, to be like Diego in a way. And Diego changes in ways that Camila doesn't see at first, or she doesn't want to acknowledge. But with having all that money also comes a little bit of that savior complex, because again, boys are taught to, okay, you get this goal, but you have to save the whole family. He doesn't have a big family. He only has his adoptive mom. So for him, his family, who is the kids at the orphanage, and Camila, who he wants to be his family, and so he wants to save her from that. And in a way, that's a commendable sentiment, wanting to help people and not forget where you're coming from. The thing that Diego did was kind of take for granted the fact that Camila would just leave everything behind and go with him and abandon his life. Again, I follow a lot of famous soccer players, and a lot of them, especially after winning the World Cup, have said, my life is pretty much the same, and what Diego says is true. They go to practice, they go home, they can't go out, they can't do any other sports, they won't go skiing because under contract they can't get hurt. And so in many ways their lives don't change, but yes, they do, because they become these household names, and that's something that Diego wants to put off as much as he can, so that he can still be a normal person. So have the advantages of being a new celebrity, but at the same time having the liberty still of traveling or going out for a stroll by the river with the girl that he likes, without being constantly harassed. But if he continues in that path to success, that's gonna end soon. I remember seeing pictures of Leo Messi in Disneyland when he was 18 with his girlfriend, who's now his wife, Antonella, and nobody knew him. He couldn't go to Argentina already, even though he was so young. And here in the US, he had a little more freedom to move around. But now he can, I don't think Messi can go anywhere in the world without being recognized, or, he'd be free to walk in the street without being, recognized. But yeah, fame changed Diego. It gave him the tools to help the people that he loves, but it also gave him those blind spots that that privilege, that of thinking, okay, if my love will be enough for Camila to be happy with whatever life I can give him. But she wants more, and it's not only the material aspects. She wants to accomplish her own success.
You mentioned that at the beginning of the process, you knew what your first chapter was and your last chapter. And so I don't know if I'm allowed to spoil things, but kind of the open-ended way that you've ended the book, especially with Diego and Camila's relationship. I was wondering and then you talked about how her choosing love. And then you also mentioned, sorry, I'm saying everything you mentioned, how it was an obstacle. Why was it important to you to write that they didn't necessarily have a very solid relationship at the end, and that it was kind of more open?
Because I didn't want to, okay, for different reasons, I'm an adult and I'm a mom, and my audience are teenage kids and teenage girls especially. And I didn't want to just give a script for this is what you do in this situation. I wanted to leave it open-ended, because really, it doesn't really matter what she chooses. Diego's a good guy. She would be happy with him. But what can you live without? If you have different goals that are conflicting, you have to choose not only, the best outcome, but the negative consequence of choosing one. Because when you choose something, you're saying no to something else. What is the no that she could live without? And for many months and perhaps years, that we don't see on the page, Camila could live without Diego, because what she wanted the most was to play in a stadium against Marta and to see a little girl wear her jersey with her name. And she gets that. And But then, that first love, that was the true love. I mean, who knows what can happen in the future? And that's why I get so many people ask me, what's going to happen with them? And I mean, I fantasize about Camila and Diego all the time. I imagine that one day they'll go to the Olympics. And I say the Olympics because that is the one sports event that men and women compete at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, what would they do? And if one of them has more success than the other. So I think about them all the time, but I wanted to leave it open-ended so that people can just imagine and choose their own ending.
Okay, so while we're on the topic of relationships, I noticed that you made a lot of your relationships in the book really complex. Like Diego and Camilla, their relationship wasn't, kiss, kiss, fall in love. And, Camilla and her mother, it wasn't like, oh, she's my mother, I need to unconditionally love her. There were very complex relationships. So I want to ask, why did you go like the hard route to make your relationships that complex?
And that's what I like to read about. I think more than a student of writing on the craft, I love to study people, and I love human beings, and I'm sometimes repulsed by human beings, but I'm always very intrigued by relationships. I think relationships is all that matters in life. And they will affect you forever. Sometimes people look down on love like, oh my gosh, there are more important things. But are there really more important things than love and family? I don't think so, because at the end of your life, who are going to be? It's not going to be your business partner holding your hand, it's going to be that love. So and relationships are layered and they change. And when people change, the relationship changes again. When I started writing Furia, I thought it was more of a story about Camila's relationship with her dad. And then I learned that it was more about her relationship with her mom. Because when Camila resolved that relationship, it's when she could figure out everything else. It just fell into place, from her friendship to, her romantic life and her career. So it was really the one relationship that was the backbone of the story. And that's something that I didn't find that until I looked at it through revision. When I was writing that first draft, I just wanted to tell a story about a girl who plays soccer and falls in love, and has to make a hard choice. But then going back and looking at it through different revisions, that's when I saw all the clues that my subconscious had left for me. And I'm like, oh, I need to flesh this out, because this is what the story is really about. It's that relationship of Camila. That's how it started. She starts naming her ancestors, and that's how it ends. And the most immediate ancestor in Camila's life is her mom. And so I think it's really interesting. And then the plot, I'm a character-driven writer because I'm a character-driven reader. And I can follow a character that I love through, we were talking about The Shadow of the Wind. There's a lot of fluff in that book that probably a ruthless editor would be like, this has to go, this has to go. And sometimes when I'm rereading it, I get bored in some sections, because they're not that important to the plot. But I love those characters so much. They're like real people to me. So I will read through anything. You want to take me on a day in Daniel's life? I'll go and, I'll be his little shadow. And that's how I feel when I'm writing too. I need to make characters that feel like real enough people that my reader will go on a journey with them, even if they don't see plot-wise where that journey is heading. And I think it's more satisfying to me to read more about the character than about the plot.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm also kind of like a character-driven person and a reader, I should say. Yeah. Kind of shifting the topic. I loved the really like authentic and raw portrayal of generational trauma in your novel, and how it's like normalized by a culture that often dismisses like women's struggles. And I was wondering if you believe the cycle of abuse ended with Camila's father being arrested, and if not, like how would that continue in Camila and her brother Pablo? Yeah.
Excellent question also. And I think, that is the beginning of the healing process. I actually read a quote by Alan Grant yesterday, and he teaches about human development and he said, it's not enough to destroy harmful patterns. You also need to build healthy ones in their place. And I think that Camila confronting her dad was a huge step. It's something that nobody had done probably in any other generation before her. Or perhaps if they did, it wasn't successful enough, but she did. And that's a good beginning for her family to change. And that's now the healing is the responsibility of every member of that family, even the dad. Sometimes that people would ask me, oh, why didn't you, have them reconciling the story? And I did that for two reasons. And going back a little bit to the character question, the dad is perhaps my one two-dimensional character. And that was also a conscious choice. I didn't want to humanize him too much because the dad is also the bodily representation of society as a whole. So he is my most, the character that looks like a caricature the most. I never know how to say that word. I can spell it. But he's my most two-dimensional because I am not interested in showing the healing journey on the dad's side. I'm interested in Camila. And I wanted to also show that it's okay if that forgiveness doesn't come soon or even in this life. I don't know if Camila would ever forgive her dad, I didn't want to put my own authorial hands, in Camila's process. So far, she hasn't. She never mentions the dad, even in the epilogue. But for her to heal, she has to do her part. And so does the mom, and so does the brother. And it's an ongoing process. And that's the thing about trauma, that I wish, it could just be healed in one session or with one act. It's an ongoing process. And sometimes trauma will resurface in different situations. Perhaps in the future, if Camila chooses to become a mother, she will have to deal with some things from the trauma, from the point of view of a mom. But so far now, as a daughter and as a teenager, there are other things that she's doing. And so it's a beginning, but it's important, and it's perhaps the hardest step. Starting is always the hardest. And so I'm hoping that, she will be diligent and that she'll continue healing, but it is a process that perhaps she won't see, the results until many, many years later.
Okay, so kind of talking about her mother and Camila's relationship, it's kind of rocky, but then there's also always that unconditional, that love that's underlying. And both of them are kind of in this situation where they have to kind of survive all the different stigmas and prejudice and just everything, all these pressures that are placed on them. Do you believe that her mother's behavior throughout the book is kind of justified by these things, or if there was more that her mother could have done throughout the process of the going from not knowing about her playing soccer to kind of supporting it at the end?
Yes, definitely. There's a lot more than the mom could have done. I mean, she is the adult in the situation. The healing process for the family didn't have to fall on her kids' shoulders, or specifically her daughter's shoulders. Camila did the hard part that, the mom says, I should have done this a long time ago. And yes, she should have, but again, she is the product of her circumstances, and she did the best she could with what she, the cards that were dealt in for her. And so Camila also looks at her mom with more compassion when she realizes that her mom, had limited choices. And she was sometimes, as when we are growing up and we look at our parents and they look like they know all the answers or they should, because they're the adults in a relationship. And it's not until we grow up and we look back and think, oh, shoot, my mom was really young in this situation. She was maybe younger than I am now. And now I understand why she made the choice that she made. So that, realization doesn't come until many years later. And the mom also, she, because of trauma, she's very mature in some of the things that she does and she says, but she's also learning. And that's why, relationships are so fascinating, because when people act the way that they're supposed to act, they make the story very simple and, straightforward. But human beings are unpredictable. And so that's why it was fun to put them in hard situations. And, when the mom found out that Camila was playing football and she saw that bruise and then said, okay, go to the doctor, or let's go to the curandera, to the healer. That's something that Camila never imagined. So that was very unexpected, because she had her own vision of who her mom is. But for the mom was natural, because that's what you do. When you get hurt, you go to la curandera. And even though she was mad at her daughter, in a way, she kept saying, the mom loved to play soccer when she was a little girl, and she wasn't allowed to play. So the mom helps Camila in her journey, because she would have loved perhaps somebody to help her when she was a little girl. But, like the relationship is fraught with misunderstanding, with judgment, and they both have to come to an agreement and kind of forgive each other and forgive themselves, so that relationship could flourish. But again, the mom is the adult, and so she should have done more.
I totally agree with that. Yeah. So relating to like feminism, throughout the book, there are like little threads interspersed, including the murders of Ida and other women in the book. So is there an underlying message between those like murders and like the different events that connect them? Is there like some message?
Yes, and again, it's something, when I set out to write Furia, I never go into my books thinking I want to teach young people this, Nobody likes to be, lectured when we are reading for fun or to learn, but you want to go consciously into a learning mode. But the more I read, reread Furia or the manuscript and saw the themes and how to bring them together, I saw the opportunity to weave in the movement of the Ni Una Menos, which also started officially in 2014. Again, I started writing Furia in 2006, and the themes were already planted there. And that's because, growing up in Argentina, I saw, and I was, kind of like a main character in many situations that Camila finds herself, like walking to the bus stop and being worried about the boys in the corner, or, you're not being dressed provocatively, but you still want to cover as much as you can so that you don't call attention to yourself. And even that fails because you still get catcalled in the street, or finding out about people that you went to school with, or were your neighbors that, were victims of violence. And so these were all topics, all things that stayed in my mind. There was one case in Argentina that was very famous that happened when I was in 7th grade. And it was a girl called Maria Sol Morales who went to a party and she was attacked, and then she ended up dying. And she went to a religious school, and I went to, a Catholic school all my life. And she was a girl that was a good girl. And I say, between quotations, because even if somebody's doing something bad, they don't deserve to die, like Maria Sol died. And so, and up until then, there had been other cases, but that was a big case on TV. And I remember that's when marches started asking for a stop of violence or more awareness. And I remember a nun who was the principal of Maria Sol's school leading these marches. So that's something that really affected me. It's not like my parents sat me down and gave me, a talk, but this is something that every little girl in my school was aware of, because we could be the next Maria Sol. And that is something, when Camila during the march is wondering which of us is gonna get to be old, which one of us is going to be next? And when she finds out that her brother and Marisol are going to have a baby, she's worried. What's going to happen with my little niece when she is born? Are we going to leave her this world? And so even if I didn't want to teach or give a certain message, I wanted to also raise my voice. You know, like my form of activism is writing. That's the way that I can be a witness to the world and also make sense of the world, and also show, you know, certain things that are happening for other people to become aware of them. And so, yes, I wanted to raise my voice and add it to the multitude of voices asking for a stop of violence, for equality. And even though Furia is set in Rosario, in Argentina, in Latin America, these are not problems that are a monopoly of South America, Argentina, and Rosario. I live in a very affluent community, you know, very homogeneous in terms of population, and we still have these issues here. And so these are more, you know, like deeper problems that affect society in every place in the world in different ways. And that's why that's why every story is important. And, you know, if you've read a book about domestic violence, doesn't mean that you never need to read a book about it again, because another author will show another perspective. So this was my way of showing how this problem affects every level of society in different ways. And I also wanted to show how Camila's mom on the first page is so worried for Camila to be safe, and the greatest danger was at home, which is the case in many circumstances. The most danger that girls or young kids face will be in their own homes. And sometimes, you know, these are such uncomfortable truths, but we need to talk about it. And that's the way that we get rid of the problem, by talking about it and finding a solution, all of us together.
Yeah, wow, that was a great response. I guess still connecting back to like feminism, like very like broad concept of feminism. A lot of what I've seen of like modern feminism has started to embrace like female rage or like feminine rage, where
Yes.
women like accept and wield anger. And how does Camila view this movement? Or actually, I kind of skipped this part. This is a really long question, so I'm going to be looking at my screen a lot. As a Latina in the US, and considering that Latinas in the US are often stereotyped as being like more, I don't know if this is the most politically correct way of saying this, but like angry or crazy than their white counterparts. How do Latinas in the US or even in South America view like this kind of female rage feminism? And how might Camila, or more appropriately, Furia, view this movement? And how might this change her character or her view on feminism at all, if at all?
Yes. So yes, sometimes, you know, it's also who is labeling righteous anger as, you know, feminist anger. It's one sector of society, and they do it for one reason. They do it to minimize the importance of speaking up, since they can't quiet the voices, they get discredit. And I'm sure you have all seen the memes, you know, like when there's a man who is angry, oh, it's a righteous anger because they're trying to defend themselves. But when it's a woman, we have to learn to de-escalate situations, to modulate our voices, to keep our cool in certain circumstances, so that we won't be dismissed, so that our opinions will be respected. And that's something that we learn even unconsciously, because otherwise, you know, okay, don't be so emotional, stop crying. You know, like if you have a fight with your brother and you're both trying to make your point, and you start crying because you're emotional. But then your voice gets discredited because you're crying. And that happens in every scale of society, from the home all the way to the government. And I will say that, I'm not religious, but I was raised a Christian. And even Jesus got mad when he saw injustice, and he swept, the vendors from the temple because he saw something that wasn't right. And so there is a place for anger. And Camila says, when she's talking about the feminist movement, she mentions the green handkerchiefs, which is the pro-abortion movement, versus the blue handkerchiefs, which is the pro-life or, anti-abortion, I should say, movement. The handkerchief also has a deeper symbolism because the madres and abuelas, mothers and grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, were a movement that started in the late 70s during the dictatorship, when 30,000 people disappeared under the military government in Argentina. And so because it was against the law to protest, the grandmas and grandmothers of these people that had been taken by the government started peacefully marching around the plazas in different points of Argentina. And they became an icon known all around the world. They were even, nominated for the World Peace Prize several times. And so that white handkerchief, it's a symbol of quiet protest. And there is a place for that. And they did a lot of good. That handkerchief symbol, is used now, green or blue, depending on which side of abortion people stand. But Camila says girls are still disappearing, and they're still going to be killed until the handkerchiefs go gray, in the clothesline. So the topic of what side of the controversy one is won't change the fact that girls are still being killed and disappeared. And this is, like another topic that I could go on and on, because these girls, I talked about the disappeared people during the dictatorship. We've had a democracy for almost 50 years, and girls are still disappearing during democracy. I say girls, but also, young children and women. And so these are problems in society that remain no matter what kind of government we've had. And so she uses, even though Camila will say that she wants to, step away from the feminist movement, it's Roxana, the one that gives her the handkerchief, and Camila's like, oh, I don't want to take a stand. She does take a stand because she's able to play football, even if it's behind her mom's back, because of the labor of the feminist women that came before her, that made it possible for her to play. And also, she channels that fury in the soccer field to be relentless, and that's why she gets her nickname. And so sometimes, even when, I know a lot of women who try to distance themselves from feminism, but the fact that we can vote, we can go to school, we can open a bank account without needing permission from a father or a husband, that's all because we benefit from the feminist movement. And so there comes a point in life that sometimes we need to make a stand. And maybe that's something that's in Camila's way later on,
I know you mentioned her nickname and how it's the title of the book and everything. And I know that kind of comes from like how she plays soccer and just like the passion and ferocity that she has when she's playing. But how did you weave that into her character outside of off of the field? And
yes,
kind of like the moment when she was like, oh, maybe I need to be more taking a stance and like putting myself out there.
I promise to the rest of the audience, we did not script this, but this goes perfectly with what I'm gonna say. Furies in Greek mythology are these beings that dictate the fate of humankind. And so by Furia taking the name for herself, she is taking her own fate into her own hands. And she does it in every other aspect of her life, unconsciously, but she's doing it. And it's not something that she learned because she's like, okay, I'm going to learn about, feminism and how I can process my anger outside of the field. But she does it following the example of Coach Alicia, who was part of a generation of women who were maligned and they who had to play football against great odds. And even in a way, her mom, sometimes we believe that this feminism has to be an all or nothing, but it comes, in doses, in layers, and it comes in different strengths at different times in our lives. But to answer your question more concisely, she's like this mythological fury, taking her fate in her own hands.
That's really cool. I like that tie to Greek mythology. I've always been like a really big fan of Greek mythology.
That was
So-
great.
Yeah, I didn't even think about like the double meaning there. That was so
I know,
cool.
right?
Like,
And then,
Fury
like-
and like the Greek mythology.
And you were talking earlier about like the dark fairy tales and stuff, and like
Yes.
the Furies are like,
I was like, dude, I would never like
oh my
never
gosh,
crossed my
that
mind
was
to like
pretty
connect
ingenious.
those.
oh my god, like the Little
Yeah.
Mermaid and the Furies. Oh, they're so oh my gosh.
So our next question, you mentioned a little bit before about Roxana and how she kind of pulled Camilla into the feminist movement, and Camilla was like, I don't really want to, but she ended up being part of it, right? So why do you think Roxana was always a little pushy when it came to Camilla, and especially her relationship with Diego? And overall, like, why was it important to give Camilla a friend like Roxana?
Oh, I gave her a friend like Roxana because I have my real life Roxanas, my friends from high school. We went to the same school all of our lives. I started in 3rd grade, but they had started in kindergarten, and we went all the way to 12th. And we're all scattered all over the world, but we talk to each other every day on WhatsApp. And they're like my sisters. I spend more time with them than with my own family sometimes. And so everybody needs a Roxana in their corner. And Roxana, I loved that character because I also wanted to show the diversity in population in Argentina. I mentioned, Camila's background is super diverse, but so is Roxana. And growing up, I had friends who were from either Korea or China. I will suggest a book that just came out by a Korean Argentine author, Imposter Syndrome by Patricia, and I'll go back to her last name, but she also talks about it. She has a Korean Argentine character in her book, Imposter Syndrome. But even though Roxana is from a minority, within that minority in Argentina, she comes from a more privileged background just because her family is more affluent. She's also a beloved only daughter, and she is allowed more liberties than Camila in a way. And she she has a loving home, and these are things that Camila doesn't have, because although of course Camila would say she loves her mom, she doesn't have that unconditional love that Roxana's parents have for her, and she benefits from that in a way. And she doesn't say so outright, but she kind of envies her friend that she can have that kind of her parents, the whole family goes to the games, and that's what Camila would love. And so but in a way, yes, Roxana is a little more privileged, and at the same time Camila is a little blind to some of the obstacles and that Roxana faces, because Camila blends in her society. Like she's a brown skin Argentina, although a lot of Argentines are white. Nobody will look at her twice in the street. But Roxana doesn't get that. She's more visible. There are tons of Chinese Argentines. The Asian Argentine community is super huge, but they stand out. And that's something that Camila doesn't recognize. And so Roxana sees that Camila has all these things and she doesn't want her friend to lose them. And that's why she's kind of against Diego, because she's worried.
Okay, so I think we are like completely out of time. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time and talking to us. I had so much fun, and it's so nice to like have like so many more views on like the book, because like when you read it the first time, you kind of like are just processing it, and like now I just want to go back and reread it and like find all the things you were talking about.
I love it. That's the goal.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I
Yeah,
still
thank you
have
so much.
Nyla's I still have Nyla's copy
Oh,
of
yeah.
the book that I forgot to give to her today, and I will return it tomorrow.
Perfect,
Yes,
perfect.
I also had so much fun. Yeah, thank you for this like experience and discussion. It was really great. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
They're all
thank you so
excellent
much.
questions. Thank
It was really nice to get to know you.
you, Hasika. Such a pleasure, Lini, Nyla.
Well, I would just like to say thank you so much, Yamile. This was so enlightening, and I too want to go back and read the book. Amazing. I feel like I don't know, been in a dream state listening to all this and reimagining everything. It's been wonderful. And thank you so much, Nyla, Lenny, Hasika. You did a brilliant job asking all your questions. And I know it was hard to pare them down because there are so many questions still that I want to ask. I also want to let everyone know, if you're interested in seeing more events with Yamile or any of our other Silicon Valley Reads authors, you can go to siliconvalleyreads.org to find out about events and activities happening. And I just want to thank you again so much. This was such a joy to be a part of. And I
Thank
have a
you.
wonderful afternoon.
Thank you so much. And if there's a question that you're dying to ask, I have a contact form on my website, yamileSmendez.com. I always try to answer all my messages, so
Perfect. Thank you, Yamile.
of course.
Okay. Bye-bye.